Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club super special extra show to celebrate not only writing and reading, but also Second Life's 17th birthday. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Oops. And I have an interesting feedback loop, but it's now gone. Uh, we are indeed outside of our comfort zone today because we are usually on Book Club Island on Wednesday. So we are not only on a different day today, we're also on a different venue here at Second Life 70th birthday party. And we also have feedback, but we don't have it anymore. Now, they tucked us away at the Book Club Island as book nerds, people who read and write and do that reading and writing, God forbid, in an age of audiovisual dominance and inside a virtual world. Before I completely go off and digress, we let me give you a quick overview of what we do on Book Club Island if you're not familiar. We meet every Wednesday on a sold out Book Club Island. And by sold out, I mean we have everybody uh, standing room only an hour before the show. We're welcoming wordsmiths from all genres, even poetry, if you can believe it. We're booked solid with authors until February 2021 and starting new shows. The Mystery Hour is coming and a show called Tell It Like It's Lived, hosted by Yvonne Battle-Felton. More about her in a little bit. So please stop by the Book Club Island, check out the events calendar, join the group, suggest a show idea by sending an email or an IM. I also put out a reading list on bookshop.org every week. They're not sponsoring us yet, but I do like their business model. Bookshop.org. Check that out. Now, today's show is titled Writers of Color, Writers of the World. And I would like to introduce my panel, and then we'll talk about what that term means, um, and the significance of that term. Now, you will notice a empty chair to the very left. That is a chair that should be occupied by Nadine Kadan, and I'm bringing up one of her fabulous illustrations. Nadine Kadan is a illustrator and children's book author originally from Syria. She lives in London now, and she is not with us today because she is with her 2-year-old at the doctor. The 2-year-old has a slight fever, nothing to uh, panic about, but it needed to be checked out. So Nadine is not with us. Nadine is an author and illustrator that deals with heavy subject matters. Her book Tomorrow is about the war in Syria. It's about a boy who doesn't understand why he can't go outside and play. This is actually an illustration. The boy here held by his mother. It's a very, very mindful approach. Very, very age appropriate, though deep, very inclusive. Her books are available from Lantana Publishing. And no worries, I will cut and paste those links into the local chat as we go along. We wish Nadine and her boy all the best and hope that she's coming back to the book club soon. Now, next to Nadine's illustration here is Yvonne Battle-Felton, also known as Gramercy in her Second Life embodiment. Yvonne is the author of Remembered. Remembered is a multi-generational exploration of the African American experience in the United States, the incredible casual everyday brutality of slavery, the resulting trauma. The story goes back to before uh, the Civil War. It culminates in the early 20th century. Yvonne lectures in creative writing at Lancaster University in the UK, and she was guest before here on the book club. Welcome, Yvonne.
Thanks so much for having me.
Not only having you, we're having you back because I'm bringing up your book here in the back. I have all props prepared here so people
Appreciate
can
that.
see this. And if you click on these props here on stage, then you will actually be linked directly to either uh, the author's website or a way to purchase the book. So please do check that out because, and I will say this again, um, if you are a reader and if you love reading, then you have to support the writers that you love, and that is by voting with your dollars or euros. Now, on the other side of me, we have Anthony DeRouen, and Anthony, please do correct me if I mispronounce your name. Anthony is a horror writer, also a director and a screenwriter from California. Grew up very close to Linden Lab headquarters, so he's probably familiar with this virtual world. He started writing with, I believe, doing fan fiction, and he has published, and this is very funny, a novel called Precipice, which on Amazon in Germany retails for 570 euros. So that's why I didn't buy it, but I think Anthony we can talk about deals later. Now,
Some markup.
yeah, I don't know. This is, shipping to Germany is crazy these days. But Anthony's also part of the wonderful anthology Tales for the Campfire. And Tales for the Campfire, and I'm going to bring up the prop, is an anthology of stories by various authors, and we'll talk about the detail. Um, I'm not sure if they're all from California, but the proceeds from this anthology go to benefit the victims of the Paradise Fire in California. If you remember, the Paradise Fire almost, I think, completely destroyed the town of Paradise, California, killed almost 100 people. Yeah, I'm bringing up the prop Tales for the Campfire Horror Stories. You click on it, and you can find out where to buy it. And then we have a very white person on the panel. I thought this is about writers of color. Actually, it's a duck. It's Samit Basu, none other than the duck of dystopia. Samit Basu comes to us from Calcutta in India. I'm ashamed to admit that I was not aware of your work, and it's even translated into German, but I'm catching up. You're a film director, a columnist, author of the Game World trilogy, which is Der letzte Held in German, and your current book is out as an ebook right now. It's called Chosen Spirits, and we'll talk about the how our beloved virtual world is involved in this book. How are you, Samit?
I'm very good. I'm very happy to be here, and it's particularly because I think about a fifth of this new novel is set in what I imagine environments like Second Life will be about 10 years from now. And I when I very excitedly asked you to make my avatar a duck, I was not aware that it would be a person of color panel, and I would be entirely the wrong color as a duck. But imagine me deep fried and glazed in
Oh,
really dark sauce.
the vegans and the vegetarians in the audience, they're leaving. I see people running,
Right.
talking about duck
But
murder
it's
here.
tofu. I'm entirely made of tofu.
um, we're talking about writers of color, and let's go. Let's start with you, Summit, because I wanted to start on the other side with our two American authors, but what's interesting is how do you see this term? Because I really want to know, and I think the audience wants to know. The audience wants to know as well if this is a term that how does it apply to countries or scenarios, cultures outside of North America, uh,
Right.
or Britain, for that matter. What I found, frankly, quite shocking was I bumped into a friend from not literally because we're still quarantined. I bumped into her on Skype the other day, and I was talking about I'm doing a Writers of Color thing, and she said, "Why do we have to say Writers of Color? Why can't we? I mean, we don't say white." And I was so floored. And this is someone who is otherwise politically engaged, big support of the Black Lives Matter movement, completely aware of racism here in our home country, but she did not understand why this term, uh, what this term signifies, or that it had to be used. So, Summit, take it where you will. In your country, in India, is
Right.
there a pecking order? How is this term used or perceived, or is it used?
Well, see, I mean, most of our discrimination happens on. I mean, we have about three or four simultaneous sort of filters of discrimination, and color as a whole is something that filters into all of these because there's a lot of skin color bias that is very deeply tied to things like casteism, that is very deeply tied to things like regionalism, because we've got a very diverse set of ethnicities in within the country. um, which also kind of is this whole set of discrimination that happens on the basis of all of those. Personally speaking, the idea of being a writer of color is something that in India, apart from basic economic stratification, I'm quite privileged on the various other fronts. So
Hmm.
it hadn't occurred to me that that I was in any kind of discriminated against category of writer for the first couple of years of my career. So it was only when I started trying to get published in the West that suddenly I realized that it wasn't, I was expected to write along kind of demographic lines. Wasn't,
Ah,
a
so
lot of
it
the
had
a
to
lot of
do
the
also with
privileges.
sort of it had to do with the subject matter and the plot that this is something I want to get into in this hour as well. You're
Absolutely. I
mhm.
mean, I was absolutely stunned one day when I found that. So I was getting these rejections from the UK for my first novel, which was a fantasy novel. And Indians weren't really supposed to write fantasy novels at that time. You were supposed to write sort of these intergenerational diaspora novels.
Mhm.
Um, so, I mean, on the same day, I got these two emails, one from a publisher saying that the book was too Indian, and the other from a publisher saying that the book wasn't Indian enough. And I didn't understand what either of these things meant.
Oh
Um,
my good
so the
Lord.
whole idea of writers of a specific color and a specific culture are supposed to write within a certain set of boundaries and be looked at as a demographic, as opposed to having the freedom to write about whatever they wanted without having to having to kind of follow in the tracks specific political or cultural directions that had been perhaps not selected by them when they started was new, and it was quite strange. And I mean, in the 17 years that I have been working in various creative fields, it's been quite interesting to kind of see where the boundaries are drawn. And when these events happen culturally that really shift the world and that really kind of bring the whole writers of color, persons of color, have things improved over the last few decades? Have they not? Debates going on. These are further complicated by in India we have every kind of racism happening, but it's kind of slanted differently from, say, the way racism might happen in America. So all of these debates, all of these discussions really kind of there's a multiple sort of translation process that happens before we filter them into our local context.
Mm. This is very interesting, and I would imagine that it's also intertwined with class, as you suggested. I mean, I'm so fascinated, and I tell people I know very little of Indian culture and politics. All I know about India is really from Arundhati Roy's excellent fiction and nonfiction writing, which I
Right.
highly recommend. Her latest book, or her second nonfiction book, fiction novel is the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, which is amazing. But so real quick before we move to the others, and I know that Yvonne has an anecdote, a story along the lines in terms of very strange feedback about plot and specific characters. Samit, you were saying when you were saying that you were privileged in the Indian context, and that I'm assuming then is because of your uh, class origin or socioeconomic
Yeah,
position?
so it's my name's a Hindu name. I'm from one of the non-oppressed castes. I'm male. So all of these things are very strong privileges in India.
Hmm.
And these are also things that I mean, you learn in school or you learn from around you that these are things that were formerly social evils in India, and we've moved past them. But the truth is, we have not at all.
Right.
So I mean, the older you grow and the more you kind of encounter culture outside theory, the more you find that all the ancient barriers still kind of remain,
And it's
and that
yeah.
these play into every possible form of expression, both physical and cultural, that you might undertake at work or in life.
Anthony, you are from America. How do you connect with the term writers of color? What comes to mind when you hear this term? Also, maybe in the context of your chosen genre, horror. I just saw an amazing documentary about black actors in horror films. It's called Horror Noir.
Interesting.
So take it where you will, Anthony.
Well, yeah, I was part of the anthology. You can see behind you, Tales for the Campfire. I'm part of a writers group, and in the Bay Area, we're a melting pot of diversity, and I myself am mixed as well. So I can see, color and various shades and perspectives. So I don't identify with one particular one. I could identify with probably up to four. But yeah, the book is we have all races represented. We have a Latin writer, we have Swedish, there's Black writers, German, French, you name it, and they're all from the Bay Area. All 25 of us. As you know, the Paradise Fire, it wiped out the entire town in upper Northern California. It was a major tragedy for California, and we as writers, we were at a loss as to what to do, because we all felt the pain. A lot of things were canceled or postponed, and some of the writers' lives were affected as well. So we decided, well, let's do what we do best, and then that's write a story. So we all got together, we spread the word out through the Horror Writers Association, which we're a part of, and we had 25 writers that were selected, but we had 150 submissions. So this was something that we put together ourselves, self-published. We got the artwork, we did the editing. I personally went out to a number of bookstores and friends, and we did a bunch of signings up and down the Bay Area. So, when you say writers of color, I mean, it's what we've been doing. There's nothing new to that. It's I think as far as writers, I saw a comment in the chat. There's a certain anonymity to writing. You don't even have to use your real name. In fact, you don't even have to put a picture. The only thing that stands out is your work. So I think this is it's an excellent medium to jump into to make yourself known without being judged on who you are as a person on the outside.
I want to talk a little bit also about the context in Second Life, but that's interesting. Did you ever bump up though? Because I hear this, almost everybody who I interview here says that when they get often pigeonholed when they talk to an agent or a publisher in terms of stories that are related to their ethnicity, and then they can't go outside, or they're being lowballed in terms of negotiation. I'm fee negotiations and such. I'm outside of this industry. I'm just a fan and a reader. So I'm wondering if you ever had situations where you felt that your ethnicity, and maybe you want to tell us a little bit. You said you're mixed. Tell us the mix if you want. And growing up in California, how that was. But did you bump into situations where you felt you were looked at differently and maybe treated differently from your white I'm looking at the white duck here. I was going to say the white ducks of the world.
Well, I'm Panamanian and French, and also a little bit of Jamaican. So growing up, it was funny because in middle school I was too dark for the white kids, and too white for the dark kids, and I didn't speak Spanish, so I couldn't hang out with the Latin crowd. So I basically hung out by myself. I had a couple friends.
I know why you became a writer. See, this is the cool thing. Kids, listen to this. I try to raise my son with this. I'm trying to tell my son. He said, "Oh, Dad, when you were young, you didn't have any friends and you were just at home." I say, but that's really cool because you can really develop a craft. You can get really into things. I mean, it's not completely mutually exclusive. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't go out and make friends. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, Anthony. It just really resonates with my own story as a white guy.
It's funny because the friends I had the same friends all the way through high school, and none of us fit in any particular group. But I had an Indian friend, Filipino, and another mix. He was Mexican and white. So we'd always joke that if there was going to be a flag for a little clique, it would be the United Nations. But I haven't experienced anything as far as what you're saying. Judging based on my ethnicity or race. If anything, it would probably be economics, especially in writing, because anybody can write a story. Anybody can pen to paper, start typing in Word. It takes some muscle to get a book traditionally published. It takes a lot of work, and it takes some luck, and it also takes getting to know people. So if you're not in the right position, you can be facing walls that are a lot higher for you than they are for anyone else. Now, nowadays, you can publish independently. You can put your work out there, and you can go pound the pavement, as we did, So I think those walls are a lot lower nowadays than I'd say maybe 15, 20 years ago when I started writing. But as far as the top 5, you still need some cachet behind you.
Right. Yvonne, I'm so sorry. Usually it's ladies first at the book club. You know that, but you're a frequent guest and you're a very valued guest. And Yvonne, if you want to share what you shared with me, your interaction with, I believe it was a professor in writing class, and it was similar. It was in the same category as I don't know, white splaining or whatever. Is that a term? What Samit
Yes,
was
indeed.
sharing with us about interaction with publishers who wanted him to move into a direction that was aligned with their perception of who he was.
Sure. And I guess before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about, as a writer, I've been fortunate so far. And so it's just the one book, but that's the book that I wanted to write. That was for my PhD, my creative writing PhD. And I wrote that going into it because there were questions that I had around the emancipation. And I wanted stories around emancipated slaves finding one another. I wanted to read about motherhood and family and identity. And so I was never discouraged from telling that story. I'm also quite fortunate in that I have a Black agent and a Black publisher. Both of them are amazing. And Dialogue Books, so my UK publisher, is within one of the big 5. So she's paving the way for all of us. Right, thank you. So right now, I feel like the stories that I want to tell, I'm quite fortunate to be able to tell those stories. So in publishing, I think there's been times when people read the work and it doesn't maybe end the way that they want. And I think that's going to be with any piece. But I think with mine, one of the things, or I guess one of the challenges, maybe even in shopping it around, might have been around. So my characters aren't stereotypical, forgiving Black characters that I think a lot of people want or feel like they need in their life. So, like, my characters weren't saying, okay, you killed my son, but I forgive you, or I'm going to go to church and pray about it. My characters were more, what can we light up? What can we do about it? And I think that really made some readers uncomfortable. But I wasn't here to create comfort. There were stories that I needed to write and to explore based on history. So, but the event that you're talking about, so I had been, I was in Baltimore, and I was really fortunate to have seen Nikki Giovanni give a talk. It was at the Baltimore Aquarium. It was like the backdrop was amazing because there were dolphins and they were just swimming their best life. Well, not their best life. Their best life would probably be, free, so living a life. And in front of them, Nikki Giovanni was there, and she was just talking, and it was kind of like having someone be in your living room. It was really intimate and really amazing. And I had written something kind of about that experience, and then about an experience I had in a conversation that was actually like in my living room with some friends. And so I wrote about it, and I wrote, it was creative nonfiction. So I wrote about the weather or the sound and all of the storytelling elements that would go into making this piece. The instructor was like, there's something not quite right. I'm not sure. It's just not quite there. And everything was really vague. And I am not fluent in like being vague at all, not fluent in subtlety. So, I just didn't get it. And so I kind of went back and I redrafted and, strengthened some things I thought and fleshed out some things and brought it back. And his feedback was quite similar. And he was thinking like it was going to be like a C. And I'm like, I don't even see that happening. And then finally, while we were talking, I got what he was saying. It was like this little light bulb moment. He had this idea of what Black women talk about and we're, talking. It was interesting to me that this white man, because he doesn't have the benefit of being a Black woman, goes around thinking about what it is that we might speak about. So I had to let him know that, at least my circle of friends, what we didn't do is sit there and go, wow, what a beautiful day for a Black woman. Look at all that rain. a lot of rain for a Black woman. This sun is hot. What a sunny day. Black woman. Like, what the heck? Who has these conversations? But, and also, it's not my job to speak how you think I would speak in your head. You do what you want to do in there. But in the real world, it's, I guess one of the problems might be is that some readers have this idea, and some of these readers are also, you know, agents and publishers and editors and all this, and they have these ideas about what makes a work authentic, although they don't have that access.
Well, that's what I hear all the time. Really, I mean, in these conversations, what I hear all the time is that when you have interactions with a publisher, or let's just say, you know, the money people, they have certain ideas how certain markets work, and they are sometimes, not all of them, but they're very convinced that they know exactly how these markets work, and then maybe I don't know, maybe their advice is even well-meaning, I guess. But in your case, you're also talking about somebody who is teaching the craft, I guess, right?
Yeah, and so I had the opportunity, I think, to help him because I'm a generous soul. I offered to have a conversation with him and the dean of the university and the chancellor and the vice chancellor, and we could all, you know, have a conversation about what he thought Black dialect, what he thought Black women talked about when we were just, you know, alone in our everyday life. And then, you know, didn't want to have that talk. It was, you know, unnecessary, and I got an A. So it's
You
just,
probably felt pretty bad about that too, I guess.
I mean, I got an A, but I think it's I didn't care how he felt, but yeah, I think it's part of that is maybe challenging those assumptions, and of course it depends on what you have at stake and where you are in the table if you can afford to do that. I was doing my MA, and I was really I don't know, I felt like the work was met the aims I had for it. Were there ways that it could have grown? Probably, but not in the ways that he thought. And so it's being open to feedback and recognizing when it's not feedback, it's just like, you know, racism, or it's someone's uneducated view or someone's biases or whatever, and then just separating the two.
Let me just say that if you're just randomly tuning in, this is the special book club for SL17B. We're not in our normal book club island venue. We're here at SL17B. I think we're at the Auditorium on Imagination, and I'm with Yvonne Battle-Felton, Anthony DeRouen, and Samit Basu. Three authors of very, very different works, all very exciting, and all of them are coming back to the book club in either individual one-on-one sessions or in the context of a panel discussion. In the case of Anthony, with his co-authors of the anthology Tales with a Campfire. We have in the back here Remembered by Yvonne, Tales of the Campfire, and Chosen Spirits by Samit, which is out in ebook format. And the person who is on this empty chair, this mother with the child, holding the child, this is Nadine Kadan. She is an author from Syria living in London, England, and she is taking care of her son who has a little fever. So we wish her and him all the best. She's the author of several books and a lot of illustrated books. Her website is nadinekadan.com. I'll put it in the chat in a second. I thought it was on this object. And she writes one of her illustrated books is called Tomorrow, about a boy who cannot go outside because he is in Syria and he does not understand why he is on lockdown. Another book is called Jasmine Sneeze, about a cat that is allergic to jasmine. So those are really fun stories, and I regret that Nadine is not here because she has similar stories about along the lines of discussions where publishers told her that kids cannot be exposed, okay, to themes like war in this context. And I mean, if you look at her books, especially the one about the war, it's ridiculous because it is, yes, it's doesn't pull any punches, but it's very age appropriate, and it culminates in a very, very wonderful ending that is not a superficial Hollywood type ending, but it's a deep felt ending of love and hope, without without dismissing the reality. So real briefly, when I look at the local chat here, there's some good points here. Gentle Heron made a point. I'm going to scroll back. Gentle Heron says, perhaps fiction writers need to submit text anonymously for review, as do research paper authors. That way, the editorial reading bias about author demographics might not apply. And AJ says that's an excellent thought. Lucina says that is now the way musicians are chosen for big orchestras. They play behind a curtain, so you don't have preconceptions about gender, etc. That is correct. Thanks for mentioning that. AJ is also mentioning LL McKinney's A Blade So Black. We had LL McKinney on. Now today we have authors here from very different, very different genres. I was wondering, Samit, don't you have more license to go outside of the boundaries, whatever the publishers perceive when you write in the fantasy sci-fi genre? And Anthony, I have the similar question to you. I guess you have more freedom than when you write something that is based in actual history, like Yvonne does. Um, I mean, I don't know. Is that how you guys feel, or is that your experience when talking to
Actually,
others?
actually, in a strange way, no, because what often happens is that and this is irrespective of medium. I think whenever you're looking at something where the work needs to be packaged and sold and therefore categorized and grouped, and you need to be pitching it to various people who might not be experiencing the full length of the work that you're creating. There are always conformities that form. There are always lines that you're expected to stay within. So for example, if I'm writing in fantasy, when I'm writing in India, I'm kind of free to do whatever I want also, because after a certain number of years and books that have done well, both publishers and readers are willing to just be interested in seeing what I want to do next. But I found that if I want to write for, say, publishers outside India, and of course this is something that a discussion begins where I can explain that I don't necessarily want to be defined by retelling Indian mythology or explaining Indian culture to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
These
I
don't
understand.
have to be the only things that I am allowed to do as an Indian writer of fantasy, and especially if fantasy and science fiction are supposed to be the literature of the imagination, they should also be the literature of freedom, so to
Mhm.
speak, where you don't have to be bound by where you're from or who you are, and you can choose to tell whatever story you like. But if you choose to tell the story of your own people, that's a very different thing from being told that this is the only option available to you as an Indian writer.
Mhm. Mhm.
So these are always, and there's a parallel process when you're working with, say, the film and TV industry, where the challenge is not so much defining you as a creator, but of investing money in whatever you're creating. So so no one wants to do say a really kind of special effects driven big budget thing unless they're very sure that it's very marketable and it's something that's worked before. So there the constraint is on kind of imagining new things. So in each medium, in each field, in each kind of storytelling, there are always these kind of conformities that develop and these challenges that occur, and kind of working your way around them over the years is part of what is part of the experience of, I think, growing creatively. Even apart from kind of trying to get better at the core of your work, you have to figure out how to tell your story along with how to tell it.
Right. Uh, this is so fascinating to me. And I hear you loud and clear, and it's so important that it is hopeful that we have this discussion. It seems to me on almost all social media platforms. I mean, people are talking about this. Anthony, I was wondering because you mentioned earlier um, self-publishing, and I have a note here on my run sheet that I don't want to forget talking about this, because this is also very important. And I know we have a lot of writers from Second Life in the audience, actually, aspiring writers. Some are published, some are not published. Can you make the case for the freedom of self-publishing? Maybe the plus and minus, I guess. I mean, you did it with this anthology. I don't know with your other work. I was joking earlier when I saw your first novel. I mean, this is only on Amazon. I'm sure I can buy it elsewhere. That the novel was 570. Euros, I have no idea how they calculate it. Maybe it's out of print.
I think
But
it is, yeah.
what's the advantage that you can see when you hear this in the context of some of the other people here on the panel, what the advantages of self-publishing can be?
I think the advantage is you are absolutely free to do whatever you want, because everything that's done is done under your power. So you don't have to conform to an editor who says, well, I like your work, but let's make these changes. You don't have to write for a specific audience that says, you know what, we're looking for writers who can cater to this type of group, because we put out novels that cater to this type of group. When you self-publish, you are absolutely free to do whatever you want, but there's a caveat to that, because you don't have the marketing muscle to put out your work once it's finished. You're not able to open as many doors. Let's say Yvonne here. We're not able to open as many doors as Yvonne might be able to, because we don't have all that muscle behind us. Now, collectively, I think we were able to make some moves as far as getting novel to different places. We attended a number of festivals in and around the Bay Area. But as far as reaching overseas, if you're independently published and you're not, I want to say savvy as far as getting novel across seas and making a presence there, you are fairly limited as far as how far your reach can be. Unless your story takes off and someone, it attracts the attention of a publisher, let's say. If you're selling a good number of copies, Amazon has a long list of positive reviews, and an editor or a manager or an agent approaches you and says, good, why don't you sign up with us? We'll get it to a larger audience, because that does happen. And that's one of the things with self-publishing is you might just find that that person who gets you the extra mile, and sometimes you don't need it. Sometimes you just want to put your work out there, you feel good with that, and you're not worried about sales figures or turning it into kind of like a lucrative career. Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, and for anyone starting out, you definitely want to look at both sides. You want to go with the standard publishing role? Do you want to fill out the query letters, go to pitch meetings, or do you just want to put your work out there? So you can have fun with both of them, I see.
What is fascinating, because what Samit said, he felt boxed in within the genre. Anthony, the horror genre, do you feel boxed in with the horror genre? I mean, how do you approach this genre? Is it for you a vehicle to just go crazy, or is there a component of social commentary in there? I mean, we all know that horror is, I would argue, this is my personal opinion, probably the best genre to transmit social commentary. There's a lot of examples for that. And
I won't listen here because it's only an hour show, but the one I always like bringing up is George Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Absolutely.
Was a major social commentary on the Vietnam War. I think with horror, you can use it as an excuse to how the world is in your point of view. Now, you're not bound to anything, although, as Samit said, if you're bound in reality, at least in the beginning, you can engage your audience, you can bring them in, they have some familiarity with what you're talking about. That helps. That also helps to establish dangers later on, because if you start out, I think, in this kind of abstract thing, they may not understand, they may not have a firm footing. But as far as my writing, it always starts something concrete, something relatable. The characters are relatable. From my point of view, they're always diverse. The locations are also diverse. But I always start from ground zero, and then I work my way up.
Mm-hmm. And this is so interesting, because Yvonne is the only one on the panel here that I can direct the question that I also find fascinated by. You actually did write a story. I mean, you mentioned this earlier. Your book is about the African American experience. So so everybody was really happy with you, Yvonne, right? You you put yourself into the box and you delivered. That was very tongue in cheek.
I feel like things that they were happy about were, so it does talk about slavery. It is about the emancipation. There are some people who might want that, and there's a whole lot of people who might feel like, oh, why do we need to talk about that again? As if but I feel like looking around and looking at the news and reading the newspaper, all of that shows you why we need to talk about that again. It's because we're still living the legacy of slavery. But anyway, so but there will always be people who don't want to explore the stories that you want to explore. So I guess the things that were, I was quite fortunate in that these were questions I wanted to ask. They started my PhD, my research started with questions. My next book starts with questions as well that I have for myself that I want to explore. Then, sorry?
I'm sorry. I was going to jump in. I'm looking. I was just reminded of the time. I don't want to cut you off, Yvonne, but I want to contextualize real quick that what we're talking about here is what you're alluding to is that oftentimes African American writers, some express, I don't want to be boxed in, like Samit was saying in his context, African American writers. Some say, I don't want to be boxed in to have to write about Black trauma. I want to be free. I want to do other stuff. I want to do freewheeling fantasy or whatever. And other people say, well, we have I don't know. Do they say we have a responsibility to work through this stuff?
I'm saying for me, at least, I write the stories that I want to tell and I want to read and feel, because writing for me, it's something that it helps me to empathize with other people, but it makes me a better human. So I write about questions that I have. Like I wanted to know about families reconnected, and I wanted to know about that horror. I wanted to write about that horror of not knowing where your child was because someone had stolen your child away, how you might find them and reconnect and build those relationships again. But also, so while it might have been a book that, some people needed, it was my book is set, part of it is 1910 Philadelphia, and there's a character who was beaten by police for a crime he may or may not have committed. And I wrote that part was me exploring, because while I was doing my PhD, they killed Freddie Gray in Baltimore, the police. So I wanted to kind of work through that fear, because, if I can't keep my children safe, that haunts me. So I needed to write about those things. And it was, I guess, fortunate that, everything. So I entered into a contest in the north of England, because that's where I'm based. And I was really fortunate. I won the contest, and I met my agent through that, and then the publisher. And so all of these things, and I guess sometimes it's the right story at the right time. But I think it's even more than that, or along with that, it's writing the story that you want to write. And that answers the questions that you want to answer.
Yeah, no, this is, my question was probably as ignorant as a lot of questions along the lines, very black and white. Do people like this or that? And you answered this beautifully. If it should be no group should be required. I think we all agree on this. Samit was saying the same thing. Why should any ethnic or group of even socioeconomic class be required to confine themselves to a specific narrative and then work within that box? Ultimately, it's about writing the stories that you want to read. I'm looking at the time, and I have so many questions here, and it's always running so fast, and I'm so thrilled that we're all here together. This is the SL Book Club. Before I forget, I just want to throw this out there. The SL Book Club is on Book Club Island, folks, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. Okay, so you can find that in the destination guide. You can join the group, and you will be informed. The next show is with Matt Ruff, the writer of probably most known as Lovecraft Country, because that's being made into an HBO series with an amazing cast. And yes, I will ask him the question about cultural appropriation. I'm not afraid to ask that because Matt is a white guy, and he wrote about the African American experience in the Jim Crow era in the 1950s. And the film is being developed, or the series is being developed by Black producers and an all-Black cast. So that's coming up next Wednesday. Now, where were we? Since Yvonne is talking a little bit about her plot, Samit, can you summarize your plot and give us a little teaser and whetting our appetite so that we pick up chosen spirits, and then Anthony can do the same. Samit.
Right. Yeah, and actually, picking up exactly where Yvonne left off, because I entirely agree with everything she said. So this book is actually entirely about people of who come from where I come from, who live in the environments I live, except that it's 10 years in the future. And while people haven't changed, the environment has shifted a lot. Countries sliding very fast into totalitarianism and absolute surveillance. So it's a book where it's people who
It's
are
a
like me,
nonfiction
like
book, are
people.
you saying, basically? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So it's that nice intersection between the news and science fiction, which are increasingly hard to tell apart. So
Indeed.
it's yeah, so it's about people who are kind of from my socioeconomic cultural strata living in the city where I live, in the future environments that I now live in. They're struggling to kind of lead normal lives, to find happiness, to just have a normal day in a country that is just getting more and more turbulent and chaotic around them, where they feel responsible to kind of join into the horrible things that are going on around them, but it's also quite scary. So they try to find a normal life, they're trying to find happiness, and the story of how they slowly fail at that is the story of.
Awesome. And of course, as we mentioned, there's a Second Life type world weaved into that, and I can assume that they probably then flee into that world, and it's all escapism, and the world collapses around them while they're playing bingo in the virtual world.
I
Sorry,
wish they just have work meetings.
they they have meeting. And Anthony, Tales for the Campfire. What can we expect from when we pick up this book?
You expect to be scared. So
Good.
if you like
Very
horror,
good.
this is your thing. And we cover, surprisingly, after I read all of my colleagues' stories, we cover all the bases: psychological, body horror, gore, zombies. I do the supernatural. There's dark fantasy. There's vampires, werewolves. You absolutely name it. It's in this novel. And yeah, as you mentioned, I think we're going to be back in October. I'll have at least 3 of my colleagues up here, and maybe we can even do a reading. They're all short stories, except for a couple longer ones. And I think short stories, you get in and out, you get on to the next story, and they're all enjoyable. All of them. They're all. I felt this is all of our best efforts we put, towards a worthy cause, with all the proceeds benefiting the North Valley Community Foundation, that is taking care of the Paradise victims. So I think we definitely put our best foot forward as far as horror writers. A lot of fans, as far as feedback when we revisited festivals, they enjoyed the work, and they were basically giving their friends and picking up other copies. So yeah, we're happy that people are enjoying it, and anybody who likes the written horror form, I think you're going to find something, at least a couple things in here that you're going to enjoy.
Awesome. And I have to go back to this question because it does fascinate me. I mentioned earlier I watched a documentary called Horror Noir, and it's on Shudder.com, and it's about the role of Black folks in horror. And if you watch the trailer on YouTube, I mean, it puts it all out there, where some of the people interviewed say, we were in the beginning of horror, we were killed, and then first of all, we were played by white people. Then we were the first to be killed, and then it sort of progressed. And and I think Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead as well. I mean, have very prominent. Night of the Living Dead too, very prominent black characters. But since you are also, I found this out, Anthony, I'm doing my research. You are the founder and festival director at the Death's Parade Film Festival in San Jose. Because they're all expressing in this documentary that when they grew up as African Americans in the US, they felt as outsiders because they loved horror. I mean, you already said that you were an outsider like me.
Right.
We both didn't have any friends, but is the horror thing? I mean, is that something where people go like, "What? How come you love horror?" I mean, I also have this friend who is a black metal fan. He's a black guy from LA, and he loves metal. And sometimes people look at him like, "What? What's wrong with you?"
I love metal too. You Slipknot fan?
Oh my God! Look at that. We have so much in common.
Kismet. I think horror is the ultimate escapism. There's so many ways that you can enjoy it, and it's kind of like people ask me, why should I get into horror? I say, well, do you like roller coasters? And they say, oh yeah, I love roller coasters. And I say, well, do you like the beginning of the roller coaster when it takes forever to creep up to its apex? And do you like that feeling of anticipation, of fear, of anxiety, right? Does your palms start sweating? You can feel your heart beating a little faster. And if they say, yes, I think that's the best part, and then going back down, well, I say, well, that's horror, because we're going to get you in a setting where you're going to feel uncomfortable. And you're not going to, with the good stories, you're not going to know what's going to happen around the corner. And when you come out the other side, it might not be the same. There's going to be a little part of you that's changed. And I think that's the good part of horror is you can just jump into it, and from the comfort of your home, you can enjoy something worthwhile. It's just like fantasy, but with horror, I think you can take it to extremes, and depending upon the story, I think you can really dive into some things that you probably wouldn't have in other genres. But yeah, it's I find it fascinating, and it keeps me inspired to do more. And I write all the forms: script writing, a little bit of poetry. I write for podcasts, features, and the novels. So I just like writing it in the different forms, and seeing how people enjoy it.
We have 9 minutes left. If people have questions for the panelists, please put them into the local chat. Again, Nadine Kadan couldn't be here. I hope she'll be back. Please check out Lantana Publishing. Let me post this again in the local chat. That's the publisher that specializes in children's books and young adult and picture books, people with diverse ethnic backgrounds. This is an amazing company. Please check it out, lantanapublishing.com. There we go. So we have 9 minutes left. Let's divvy this up among the panel. Yvonne, what are you working on next? Because you have alluded to maybe going into a different story, a different feel after you have written such an enormously important book in my mind that touched me deeply. But it deals with a brutal reality. It deals with a brutal past that reverberates into the present day. Are you doing something light?
I would say yes, but so at first,
sorry.
I thought I was going to be writing another historical fiction, and I thought I would be writing about the Red Summer, that period in the U.S. where there were a lot of racial massacres in 1919, and I kind of thought I might be because I was just fascinated about that, and then thought it was going to be one specific location, and then I would do more research and find out it was this widespread American, it seems like, phenomenon that all over the country, Black people were not safe. Then I was writing that, and then lockdown happened, and I was still in the research. I was trying to find the voice for the piece. And I would start writing, and then things would get darker and darker. And so now I think I'm writing something that's a bit murder mystery, a bit horror. And I'm not going to use the 1919. But right now, what I've been quite fascinated by is The Lottery, Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. Written a short story, it was a flash fiction inspired by it. I think maybe a year or so ago, and that was published. And then I did they asked me would I do it a slightly longer run, and I was like, sure, why not? And I did that one. And then now there is something in that voice and something about this idea about this town that and these people within this town that will turn against each other I don't know, one day a year. And the rest of the year, it's all these relationships. But of course, people are still remembering and holding on to grudges and doing whatever. And I'm just really enjoying writing this right now. So that's one of the things that I'm doing. And then I'm also, I never keep a diary. During lockdown, I've been doing this, these audio kind of clips of me doing recipes. I'm not even a good cook. I've been doing recipes for my kids or my grandkids if I ever, whatever, kind of for the future. And it's really, so I'll be talking about what I'm cooking, but then also talking about, going to the store with a mask on, and how I'm experiencing this and Black Lives Matter and all these things that I feel like it really helps me to kind of picture and create and explore where I'm at right now.
Journal writing and diary is so important, and I'm speaking as someone who has tried to do this for years, and every week I'm buying a new pad of paper, something really nice, sometimes expensive things, and I don't do it. And I recommend this to everyone who to get up in the morning and the first thing to write down what your dreams maybe, or it's super important. The one thing that I do is after I finish a book as a reader, I write a little summary and my feelings and my thoughts about it. That's was recommended to me by a writer here in Second Life, Daisy E. Cayman Sands, who is a published sci-fi writer, wonderful stuff. And she recommended this to me, and I'm doing it now. Anthony, what are you working on? And I know this is another thing that I wanted to ask. We can go over a little bit. I was just told by the producer. But Anthony, what are you working on? And how do you, this is a question that everybody asks in the audience usually, how do you structure your day with writing? Do you have any tips when for people who have a day job? And and I know that even writers who people may feel they live in mansions or whatever. It's sometimes kind of a sobering reality how little even people who sell a lot of books make. So a lot of people have to keep their day jobs, and it fascinates me how you structure this. I mean, with discipline, I'm assuming, but are there any tips?
I have 3 kids. And
Oh my
all
God!
crazy in their own minds. So I have no structure. Every day is completely different. But whenever I find free time, as you mentioned earlier, I run a horror film festival, and I've been extremely busy with that, putting out podcasts and horror screenings. But when I do have actual time to write, it takes maybe about I put at least a half hour or an hour into it. Kind of brainstorm, what I'm going to do next. I basically have to be laser focused in, because I don't have all day to sit behind a computer and just kind of tinker around. So I'm usually thinking about what I'm going to write in the morning. I have a really good idea of what I'm going to put in by the afternoon, and by the evening, I'm putting words to paper. And because I kind of switched over to short stories, it's been a lot easier to crank out content. Before, when I had a lot of free time, I was able to do novels and whatnot. But nowadays, it's pretty much short stories and the film festival work.
It's still with kids, and my son is almost 17 now, but I find it extremely difficult to carve out these pockets. I mean, you have to learn to
It is very
adapt that
difficult.
way, right? And I think what everybody learns is to just jump on the opportunity when one child sleeps, and you just get a sense over time. I mean,
Yeah.
you grow with your challenges there, right? Samit, how about you with day job and discipline and all that kind of sort of like logistical day to day getting things done kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't have a day job, but I also have no discipline. I think for the last
That's the best of both.
18 years or so,
No excuse, Simon.
I've been
Just kidding.
dreaming. I've been dreaming of this perfect routine where I have a daily word count and I have a great structure to my day. But I think the big flaw with the way I work is that each different project seems to kind of grow organically its own way of work. So, some projects I can do in a very organized manner. Others just require me to kind of binge and fast on the execution of them. So, I'm still hoping that one day, maybe when I'm in my 70s, if I survive to that age, I will have a proper routine of how to work. But until then, I mean, for me, I'm just going to spend the next few months catching up on reading and watching things a lot, because I've just come off a film and watching this novel, and um, I feel like I don't know so much of what's going on in the world. So there's going to be a few
Right.
months of that where I decide what I'm going to work on next. I'm going to do
But
that. It's probably going to be historical fiction. That's what I
but
think,
that
but I don't really know.
and I'm assuming because you've been doing this for so long, you have a sense that when, you have probably developed a natural intuitive sense when to stop basically the, quote unquote consuming or research, and then when the active phase comes. I mean, this is something that I know as a musician and a producer. This is really the key, and there is some magic to it, and it's learnable to some extent, but you need to at some point rely on this intuitive sense. When is it time to go from the I don't know, the dreaming, the brainstorming phase to the grind of the execution, right?
Well,
It
see,
comes easier when you
I'm
start putting. Oh,
Bengali,
sorry.
so no. I'm Bengali, so I'm driven by guilt mainly. So there's a point where the guilt becomes overwhelming. You're like you're pretending to be thinking and dreaming, but you've just been doing nothing for weeks. So just get to work. So
Aha.
that it's pretty simple, and it seems to work. Sorry, I interrupted you, Anthony.
Oh, it's okay. I was going to say the hardest part about writing is the actual writing. Now, I say you're thinking about what you want to write, you have this great story on your mind, but the hardest part is actually just sitting there and
Right.
putting it to paper. I found that I was procrastinating a little bit, but as you mentioned, Samit, you start to feel this kind of weight on your shoulders. You have a story that you want to tell, but you just can't get around to telling it. And after a while, it starts bearing down on you, or at least for me. And if I don't put it on paper, it might just threaten to consume me. And the whole day I'll just start, thinking about this story. Like, geez, I really need to get on this because now it's just overwhelming me. So
Yeah.
you finally start just to sit down, kind of, set the distractions aside, and you start putting words on the paper. You find it becomes easier and easier the farther you go along, to the point where you almost have a draft, depending upon how big the story is. You can have a draft fairly quickly after a while, after it's been kind of percolating in your head a bit.
This is funny. So the guilt, the Bengali guilt, then the guilt of the story itself. It's like the story's talking to you, like, "Get me done. Come on, sit down, do it."
Just the messenger.
I mean, as a German, I know a lot about guilt, but Yvonne, how about you? What is driving you? Briefly, we're out of time. 30
I guess
seconds.
it's the story and it's the mom, and I don't have the luxury of not writing if I'm not in the mood.
Good. Yvonne is starting a new show at the Second Life Book Club Island call. It's called Tell It Like It's Lived. And you can check out the book club calendar. You can check out the destinations guide here in Second Life. This was a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Yvonne Battle-Felton, Anthony DeRouen, and Samit Basu, and Nadine. We wish you all the best in absentia. Hope that you're doing good. We have the book club show every Wednesday at 12 p.m. on Book Club Island. You can find the links everywhere, like I said, on the destination guide. Next week, we have as the guest Matt Ruff, author of Lovecraft Country, but also his latest book, 88 Names, which is about virtual worlds. Okay, so we'll talk. It's a deep dive, and then Anthony is coming back with his crew. Summit is coming back. We're booked for the entire year. Everybody's welcome. Um, I'm going over time, but I need to say this. I am so honored to have these high quality writers talk to me, and I'm so honored by an audience that loves this format and that is coming back, and a community is building. If I have any agenda, the agenda is to convince everyone in Second Life that picking up a book and sticking with it is well worth it. And I'm aware of that some people might find this ironic that we're in an audiovisual entertainment platform talking about the written word, but it's beautiful. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Thank you to my staff. My staff, it sounds like I have complete control over them. I don't. I should be thankful that they don't fire me. Strawberry running the camera and doing the producing. Brett producing, marketing, security. Squeaky Mole, Kronos Mole. I think I saw Abner Mole earlier. Patch Linden and his entire team. Marianne McCann working a lot on the props. Kralos working on the avatars. AJ made wonderful Second Life cups. You can only find them at the book club venue. Head on over there. Maximus Mole is with us today because Maximus is doing sound and stream. I think I hope I didn't forget anybody. But that's it. See you next Wednesday at 12 o'clock Second Life time at the Second Life Book Club.